Hey there, welcome. Tonight, we step quietly into a tale from the cold, wild north, where thunder rolls like a heavy drum, and even gods sometimes find themselves in less than godly situations. This is the story of Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and the rather unusual trouble that came when it went missing. It's a story of disguise, awkwardness, and a bit of stubborn thunder. Settle in, and let's dive in. The dawn breaks softly over the vast, rugged lands of Asgard, the shining realm of the gods. The sky slowly shifts from deep midnight blue to pale, gentle hues of pink and gold. A faint breeze stirs the leaves of ancient trees. Birds begin their tentative morning songs, and the world slowly wakes from its long night, except something feels off. There is a silence where there should be thunder, a stillness in the air where there should be a low, rolling rumble, like the distant growl of a restless beast. A morning without thunder is like a feast without meat or a poem without rhythm. It simply doesn't feel right. At the heart of this unusual calm sits Thor, god of thunder and all things loud and boisterous. Usually, he greets the day with a booming laugh that echoes across the hills and valleys of Asgard, his very footsteps shaking the ground beneath him. But today, the thunder god is quieter than a mouse in a library. His bed is unusually cold and still, lacking the reassuring weight of his trusty hammer, which usually rests close by like a loyal companion. Thor's sharp blue eyes snap open, scanning the room with a mix of confusion and growing irritation. Where in the 9 worlds is that blasted hammer? He mutters under his breath. The room feels oddly empty without it. No comforting hum of power, no faint crackle of electricity in the air, just silence. You might think a god like Thor wouldn't notice a missing hammer. After all, he's a god. Surely he could summon it with a word or a thought. But no, Mjolnir is special, more than just a weapon. It is a part of him, his symbol, his identity. Without it, Thor feels like a bird without wings, a storm without lightning. The servants and minor gods who bustle through the halls notice this too. They exchange nervous glances as Thor lumbers through the great hall, rubbing his temples and scowling. The usual thunderous energy that surrounds him has been replaced by a heavy, uneasy, quiet. Even Loki, the ever-smirking trickster god, who usually delights in others' misfortune, looks uncharacteristically concerned. He watches Thor with a calculating eye, trying to hide the flicker of worry beneath his usual sly grin. Thor's voice finally breaks the silence. The hammer is gone, he says, low and steady, like a storm building just beneath the surface. The words hang in the air, heavier than the thickest fog. A hush falls over the hall. The gods and goddesses, used to the comforting presence of Mjolnir, suddenly realize that something far more serious than a misplaced tool is at hand. For without the hammer, the balance of the world, the protection of gods and mortals alike, is threatened. The hammer is not only a weapon, it is a sacred object forged in the fires of the dwarves, imbued with the power to summon thunder, to level mountains, and to defend Asgard from the giants who lurk beyond its borders. Losing it is no small matter. It is an event that shakes the very foundations of the divine realm. Thor's fists clench unconsciously, his knuckles whitening. The usually booming god feels an unfamiliar weight settle on his broad shoulders, the weight of uncertainty. For a moment, he considers shouting a challenge to the skies, daring whoever has taken Mjolnir to show themselves. But something holds him back. A quiet voice at the edge of his mind warns that this is not a foe to be met with thunder and fury alone. Instead, Thor gathers himself and calls a meeting of the gods. They gather in the great hall, faces etched with worry and curiosity. The air is thick with tension, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of silk and the faint clinking of armor. Loki leans forward, a gleam in his eye. "Well, this is awkward," he quips softly, though his voice carries an undercurrent of genuine concern. "Losing your hammer is like a blacksmith losing his hammer. It's inconvenient." The others don't laugh. A deep voice from the back speaks up. Odin, the Allfather, whose one eye seems to pierce the very soul of the problem. We must find Mjolnir, he declares solemnly. Without it, we are vulnerable. The giants will see weakness and come forth. The meeting settles into uneasy silence. Plans are murmured and dismissed. Suggestions are tossed like arrows, some missing the mark entirely. Thor, meanwhile, paces the hall. The god who commands storms is suddenly reduced to a worried man searching for a lost tool. It is a humbling sight. The day stretches long and slow, the sun rising higher, but the thunder remaining stubbornly silent. As Thor looks out over the golden fields and shimmering lakes of Asgard, he feels a strange mix of frustration, embarrassment, and a simmering determination. For even gods have their off days, and sometimes even the mightiest warriors have to face the inconvenient reality of losing their favorite hammer. So, as you settle deeper into your chair or bed, imagine the quiet before the storm, the calm that promises something more, something unpredictable. Because Thor's day without thunder is just beginning. The sun climbed lazily higher, and still there was no thunder. For a god whose mornings usually began with the earth trembling underfoot, the quiet was unnerving. Thor paced the great hall like a caged bear with too much caffeine, his thoughts spinning faster than the wheels of a chariot pulled by frantic horses. How does a hammer just vanish? He muttered, tapping his chin with a knuckle that could crush mountains. It's not like I left it on a bench at the market, or did I? The idea made him wince. Thor wasn't known for subtlety, but he was meticulous with his hammer. The hammer wasn't just a weapon. It was a part of his routine, a thunderous punctuation to every day. Breakfast, with Mjolnir resting on the table. A midday toss between hammer and hand. Evening walks, hammer in tow, shaking the sky like a terrier with a stick. No hammer, no thunder, no thunder, no respect from the other gods, no respect. Well, let's not even go there. He recalled the previous night's events. The feast in Valhalla had been lively, as always, but between the ale and the boasting, he hadn't noticed anyone eyeballing his hammer too closely, except Loki, maybe. But Loki's pranks usually involved illusions and riddles, not theft, or did they? Speaking of Loki, the trickster god lounged nearby, pretending to be busy, sharpening a rather suspiciously curved dagger. His smirk betrayed him. Lost something, Thunder God. I lost the something, Thor grunted. My hammer, the thing I need to smash giants, open doors, and generally look impressive. Loki chuckled, the sound like a cat knocking over a priceless vase, amusing, but with a hint of menace. Well, I suppose this is the part where I offer to help, Loki said, eyes twinkling with secrets. But who knows, maybe it's better this way. Less smashing means less noise. Your neighbors might appreciate the peace. Thor gave him a look sharp enough to carve stone. This isn't funny. Of course it's not, Loki said, grinning wider. But perhaps you should consider that someone has taken it, and not just anyone. At this, Thor's brow furrowed. Who? The giants. Some mortal fool. Worse, Loki said, leaning closer, voice dropping conspiratorially. The giants have been quiet lately, too quiet. Maybe this is their opening move, or perhaps someone much closer to home. Thor's eyes narrowed. You mean one of us? Loki shrugged. Trust me, gods can be terribly petty, and a hammer like Mjolnir, that's the ultimate trophy. Made Thor's blood boil. The gods were not exactly known for subtlety or loyalty, and with tensions simmering beneath Asgard's gleaming surface, suspicion could grow like wildfire. He decided he wouldn't wait for answers to come to him. No, Thor was going to find his hammer himself. If it was lost in the halls of Asgard, under a pile of scrolls, or buried beneath a mountain of discarded armor, he would find it. If it was stolen by a scheming god, a treacherous giant, or an overambitious mortal, well, then they'd soon learn that no one messes with Thor and walks away unscathed. But first, he had to admit something embarrassing. Despite his godly strength and thunderous reputation, he was at a loss where to start. Perhaps we should call on the dwarves, Loki suggested. They made the hammer, after all. Maybe they know where it went. Thor grimaced. If it's missing, it's a disaster. I'm the god of thunder, not the god of losing things. Ah, but even gods lose things, Loki said, casually flipping a dagger in his fingers. Like your patience, for example. Thor shot him a look, but Loki was already wandering off, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a mocking song. And so, the search began. As Thor set out, the quiet that had so unnerved him earlier now felt like a challenge. Somewhere out there, Mjolnir was waiting, and Thor was going to bring it back, one way or another. With that thought, the god of thunder took a deep breath, tightened his cloak, and stepped out into the world, ready to face whatever ridiculous or terrifying obstacle lay ahead. After all, losing your hammer is one thing. Losing your thunder, that's a whole different story. Now, if there's one thing Loki loved more than sowing chaos, it was looking helpful while doing it. It was a rare and unsettling alignment of the cosmos that Loki should be seen as useful, like discovering your cat has applied for a job. Thor, however, had limited options. With his hammer missing and his patience wearing thin, Loki's offer to assist was accepted with the same cautious optimism one might have when eating something labeled mystery meat at a feast. All right, Thor said through clenched teeth, but no tricks. Loki's smile was wide and innocent, a dangerous combination. Thor, would I ever lie to you? Thor didn't answer, mostly because the list of times Loki had lied could not be recited in under 4 hours. The two gods made their way across the Bifrost, the shimmering rainbow bridge connecting Asgard to the other realms, and paused at the edge where Heimdall stood on eternal duty. Heimdall, ever watchful, blinked slowly. You're leaving Asgard. Together, Thor grunted, the hammers missing. Heimdall's eyes widened a fraction. A man known for never blinking. That's not ideal, you think, Thor muttered. Loki, already several steps ahead, tossed a dramatic wave over his shoulder. Fear not. We shall return victorious, or mildly bruised, either way, entertaining. Their first stop was the land of the giants, Jotunheim. Naturally, because where else would one look for a stolen hammer than a realm full of creatures that deeply resented being regularly flattened by said hammer? But before they could arrive, Loki had a suggestion. I'll go ahead, he said, adjusting his cloak. Stealth, you see, grace, subtlety, all things you famously lack. Thor crossed his arms. You mean you want to get there first, so you can make a deal behind my back? Oh, please, Loki said, feigning offense. You wound me. Thor raised an eyebrow. Should I? Loki, either undeterred or delighted, transformed into a falcon, because, of course, he had a magical cloak that allowed him to fly. No warning, no explanation, just flapped off into the distance like a smug, mythical pigeon. Thor sighed and resumed walking, slowly, methodically. Thunder god or not, falcons were faster than legs. And besides, he'd learned long ago that rushing into situations when Loki was involved usually led to someone being turned into a tree. Meanwhile, Loki soared over the frost-rimmed mountains of Jotunheim, keeping an eye out for trouble, or, in his case, opportunity dressed as trouble. The land below was a bleak and frozen sprawl, dotted with icy towers and the occasional troll scratching something regrettable into stone. He soon spotted what he was looking for, Thrym. Now, Thrym was not your average giant. He was larger, of course, but what made him particularly obnoxious was his ego. He styled himself as a king, though the only thing he ruled was an uneven patch of ice and some resentful walls. Still, he had a taste for the dramatic, and more importantly, he had something Loki wanted. Ah, Loki, Thrym bellowed, as the falcon landed and shifted back into god form. Thrym laughed. Have I? You'll have to be more specific. I steal quite a bit. Thor's hammer, Loki said, as though discussing the weather. At this, Thrym grinned like someone who just found a winning lottery ticket, then swallowed it just to be petty. Ah, yes, Mjolnir. Lovely craftsmanship, just the right weight. Loki's smile was thin. And now that you have it, what exactly do you plan to do with it? Decorate your cave, host a thunderous dinner party? Thrym leaned back, smug. I'll give it back, of course. On one condition. Loki's eyes narrowed. which is, I want to marry Freya, Thrym said. Silence. Loki stared at him. You want to marry the goddess of love and beauty? That's right, Thrym said proudly, as though it were a reasonable demand. A fair trade. Loki scratched his head. Do you know Freya? She's very pretty, Thrym said dreamily. I saw her once, from a distance, through a fog. Possibly, a sheep was in the way. And you think she just agreed to this? Loki asked. Thrym waved a hand. That's for the gods to figure out. I'm simply stating my terms. Freya's hand in marriage, and you get the hammer back. Loki sighed deeply. He was used to absurdity, but this was like negotiating with a sentient mountain with delusions of grandeur. Fine, he said, already plotting. I'll talk to the others. He took to the sky once more, dreading the conversation that awaited him. Because if there was one thing more dangerous than a hammer-wielding Thor, it was an outraged Freya being asked to marry a frost giant who looked like a pile of laundry had grown limbs. Back in Asgard, Thor was still pacing, possibly carving small grooves into the golden floors. When Loki returned, he didn't even wait for the landing. Well, good news and other news, Loki said, brushing imaginary dust from his cloak. Thor's eyes narrowed. Speak. The hammer is safe, and it's currently buried 8 leagues beneath the earth in Jotunheim, guarded by an army of frost wolves and a giant with questionable fashion sense. Thor crossed his arms. The catch. Loki winced. He wants Freya's hand in marriage. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Then Thor simply said, You're telling her. Oh, absolutely not, Loki said. You're the one with muscles. You break the news. You stole a goat once and blamed it on her cloak, Thor reminded him. Fine, Loki sighed. We'll tell her together, as a team. And with that looming disaster in sight, the gods began preparing for what was surely going to be the most awkward conversation in divine history. And Freya was going to be thrilled. There are few things in life more terrifying than an angry goddess, especially when that goddess is Freya, known for her unmatched beauty, commanding presence, and a very low tolerance for nonsense. Loki and Thor stood outside her golden hall like 2 schoolboys about to confess they'd accidentally set the mead hall on fire. Thor shifted from foot to foot. Loki looked like he was calculating how far he could run if things went poorly. Inside, Freya was attending to her cats, massive, mystical beasts that pulled her chariot and judged everyone silently. She turned as the 2 gods entered, already suspicious. Whatever it is, she said, without preamble. No. Thor coughed. Freya arched a perfectly sculpted brow. You're both here, together, looking guilty. That's never a good sign. Loki stepped forward, smiling like a man trying to sell storm insurance during a hurricane. Freya, dearest goddess of beauty and delight, we come with a proposal. Her eyes narrowed. No. It's not our proposal, Loki clarified quickly. It's from a frost giant. Freya stared at him. Thrym, he continued, is holding Mjolnir hostage, and he has terms. She folded her arms. Which are? Loki hesitated. He would like to marry you. There was a pause, not silence, but a kind of momentary atmospheric vacuum where sound and joy ceased to exist. Then Freya exploded. Absolutely not, she roared, her necklace shimmering with fury. Do I look like I've lost every shred of sense? I would sooner marry a talking mushroom. Loki, trying to stay on track, held up his hands. We're all in agreement. This is outrageous. But without Mjolnir, Asgard is vulnerable. The hammer is what keeps the giants in check. Thor's mood balanced, and the occasional mountain properly flattened. Why me? Freya demanded. Because, Loki said, choosing his words very carefully, Thrym saw you once, and developed what can only be described as a severe romantic delusion. Thor chimed in. It's just a decoy plan. We don't actually intend for you to marry him. Freya's eyes narrowed. What do you mean by decoy plan? Which is when Loki, of course, revealed the actual plan, with a twinkle in his eye that meant nothing good. We disguise Thor, he said, clearly enjoying himself, as you. A pause, a very long one. Thor blinked. I'm sorry. What? To fool Thrym, Loki explained. We dress Thor as Freya, veil and all. He goes to the wedding, gets the hammer back, then demolishes everything in sight. Classic smash and grab. Thor looked appalled. You want me to wear a dress? Well, Loki said, you'll need more than just a dress. Jewelry, wig, a veil to hide your deeply unfeminine jawline. I will not wear a dress, Thor said firmly. Freya shrugged. Then I hope you enjoy living without your hammer. Thor's face darkened. You're enjoying this? Immensely, she said. After a long and increasingly painful silence, Thor finally muttered, fine. Loki clapped his hands. Splendid. Let's find a seamstress. And so, with the reluctant cooperation of the gods and a level of tailoring effort usually reserved for royal coronations, Thor was soon fitted into a gown of silk and gold, bristling with Freya's jewels, and wearing a veil so thick it could hide a small horse, let alone a thunder god. There were issues. His arms didn't fit properly through the sleeves. His beard remained defiantly visible, and when someone handed him a bouquet, he crushed it by accident. Delicate, Loki reminded him. You must look swoony. Thor scowled. I don't swoon. You do now, Loki said cheerfully. Even Heimdall was not spared. As the all-seeing guardian of the realms, he tried, really tried, to withhold comment. But when Thor stomped past in full bridal regalia, he could only mutter, I've seen the end of days, and this is stranger. Meanwhile, Loki prepared his own disguise, a much more flattering one, naturally. He would pose as Freya's handmaiden, attending the bride with dainty precision and very real glee. Let's just get this over with, Thor muttered, adjusting the veil again. You're radiant, Loki said, and dodged the incoming punch. And so, the gods sent off their unlikely bride, Thor, god of thunder, hammerless and heavily accessorized, to Jotunheim, where Thrym, smug and foolish, awaited his bride with the giddy impatience of a man who had never actually met her, and should definitely have asked more questions. Thor had faced many terrifying things in his time. Ice giants, sea serpents, the occasional prophecy of doom. But this was worse. This was a wedding. His own, sort of. Thor, dressed head to foot in Freya's finest bridal wear, sat uncomfortably in a chariot pulled by cats. Real cats. Enormous, mystical cats that disliked him deeply and made their disapproval known with every judder of the ride. Loki sat beside him, dressed as a handmaiden, eating an apple and enjoying himself far too much. You should smile more, Loki said. I will kill you, Thor replied. Not with your hammer, you won't. Thor fumed in silence as they approached Thrym's hall in Jotunheim. The icy winds howled, and the ground trembled beneath the giant's heavy footsteps. Thrym had gone all out. Garlands of bones, kegs of fermented yaks, milk, and a suspicious amount of chanting. One could almost call it festive, if one had no taste. Thrym stood waiting, nervously patting down his beard and adjusting his crown of frozen twigs. He looked like someone who had read one poem about romance and decided that was enough. When he saw Freya, his face lit up. She's taller than I remember, he whispered to his brother. And broader, his brother added. But love, as they say, is blind, or in Thrym's case, entirely oblivious. Welcome, my bride, Thrym bellowed. Thor grunted. It was supposed to be a polite, feminine sound. It came out like a bear clearing its throat. Loki stepped in smoothly. She's overwhelmed with emotion. She hasn't slept for 8 nights. She was so excited to marry you. Touched, Thrym said, chest puffing out. She must truly adore me. Thor's jaw twitched. The ceremony began. Giants played musical bones. A choir of trolls hummed off-key wedding chants, and a suspiciously large goat was sacrificed in their honor. Thor mostly glared. Then came the feast. Now, there are many things Thor is good at. Fighting, yelling, thunder, subtlety. Not one of them. When the food arrived, the bride descended like a starving wolf. He devoured an entire ox, ate salmon, all the pastries, and drained 3 barrels of mead. He cracked crab shells with his bare hands and burped with enough force to extinguish candles. Thrym tried to stay optimistic. She eats with passion, he said. Loki leaned in. She's just so thrilled to join your household. She forgot her table manners. Thrym nodded. A true woman of appetite, admirable. Then came the veil. Let me gaze upon my beloved, Thrym said. Let me see the eyes that haunt my dreams. Thor froze. Loki coughed. Tradition says the veil stays until the hammer is gifted. Just a glance. Thor's bloodshot eyes flashed under the veil. Thrym recoiled. Her eyes, they burn like lightning. She hasn't slept, Loki said. So emotional. You know how it is. Of course, Thrym said, afraid to ask further. At last, Thrym clapped, and several frost giants entered, carrying a massive object wrapped in furs and sealed with runes. Mjolnir, the hammer. Thor's hammer. The giants placed it in the bride's lap. Silence. Thor's hands closed around it like it had never left. A low rumble echoed from his chest. The air grew heavy. The sky outside dimmed. Then he stood, still in a wedding gown, still in a veil, and with all the fury of a god who had just sat through a wedding in a corset. Thor raised Mjolnir above his head and bellowed, "This is over." What followed was less a battle, more a divine cleaning service. Thrym went first, launched into the next realm with one blow. Giants scrambled as Thor, veil billowing, dress tearing, eyes blazing, tore through the feast like an avenging bridezilla. The bone choir never even finished their song. Loki, still dressed as a handmaiden, casually sipped mead in the corner. "Well," he said, "that went better than expected." When the dust settled, there was no Thrym, no feast, and no confusion. Just Thor, standing amidst the ruins, hammer in hand, breathing heavily. "I'm never wearing a dress again," he muttered. "You say that now," Loki replied, "but fashion is cyclical." Thor just growled. And so, with Mjolnir safely reclaimed, and a giant population significantly reduced, the gods returned to Asgard. One in rags, the other insufferably smug. A successful mission by Asgardian standards, which is to say, everything exploded but the right person won. The sun rose reluctantly over the land of the giants, as if it too had a hangover from the previous night's festivities. The wedding had been many things, chaotic, confusing, and by most accounts, deeply concerning. But no one could say it wasn't memorable. Thor, no longer in a wedding dress, but still mentally scarred, stood outside Thrym's now somewhat flattened hall. Bits of splintered timber and crushed feasting benches littered the courtyard. A giant foot protruded from a soup cauldron. He stretched, cracked his neck, and muttered, "Well, that could have gone worse." Loki appeared behind him, still dressed in half a veil, and sipping something dubious from a crystal goblet. Could it, though? Thor glanced sideways at him. "Did you really have to do the falsetto voice the entire evening?" "It's called staying in character," Loki replied, affronted. "You wouldn't understand. You kept eating the set." Thor ignored him. His stomach growled like a frostwolf. Do giants ever cook anything that isn't raw or still moving? They both turned toward what remained of the catering table, which was now mostly bones, overturned cauldrons, and one very nervous-looking sheep pretending to be furniture. Loki picked up a charred leg of something and sniffed it cautiously. "I think this was once a root vegetable, or someone's cousin." There was a long pause. Then Loki added, "To be fair, giant cuisine is less about nourishment and more about intimidation." Inside the hall, Thrym's surviving relatives were attempting to piece together what had happened. The bride had turned out to be Thor, who then proceeded to annihilate half the wedding party with a hammer that had appeared mid-. This, as far as anyone could recall, was not traditional. Aunt Krogler, who had knitted the ceremonial mittens, was inconsolable. Back in Asgard, Heimdall was already preparing a report for Odin. He had included a sketch of Thor in his bridal veil. The margins were filled with small, passive-aggressive doodles of Mjolnir. Odin read it, sighed, and said, "It's exactly as I expected." Frigg looked over the top of the parchment. "And you let them go anyway." "I thought they'd learn something." Frigg raised an eyebrow. "Did they?" There was a long pause before Odin replied, "They learned not to let Loki plan anything involving fabric." Back at the edge of Jotunheim, Thor and Loki prepared for the return trip. Mjolnir was now securely back in Thor's possession, polished, humming, and almost smug. It practically glowed with satisfaction, like a cat that had been retrieved from a tree, only to immediately climb another one. So, Loki said casually, would you say this was a success? Thor gave him a look. You made me wear a veil, pretend to marry a giant, and then improvise battle choreography at a feast. What part of that says success? Well, Loki said, we got the hammer back. You destroyed only half the furniture. And Freya hasn't strangled me yet. I'm calling it a win. Thor shook his head. If I ever need your help again, remind me not to ask. Loki smiled. You say that every time. As they stepped through the bifrost rainbow light washing over them like a divine sigh, Asgard loomed ahead, beautiful, orderly, and for the time being, unaware that the hammer was back in its proper place. No one had yet noticed that the ceremonial bridal crown was still tangled in Thor's belt. It would take weeks before people stopped whispering, months before someone stopped using the phrase Thunder Bride as a drinking game, and years before Thor fully forgave Loki. Loki, of course, forgave himself immediately. He'd already drafted the sequel. Back in Asgard, the mood was complicated. Thor stomped through the gate, still covered in bits of lace, dried mead, and what might have once been yak stew. His veil trailed behind him like a ghost that had seen too much. The guards wisely said nothing. Inside the great hall, Odin looked up from a game of rune chess and raised a single gray eyebrow. Eventful trip, he asked. Thor dropped Mjolnir onto the floor with a thud that cracked the tiles. The next time someone steals my hammer, he grumbled, I'm not cross-dressing to get it back. I don't know, said Loki, striding in behind him, somehow cleaner, definitely smugger. You wore it well. It brought out the fury in your eyes. Thor shot him a glare that could curdle cream. Sif, Thor's wife, a patient woman by necessity, appeared in the doorway, took one look at her husband's outfit, and blinked slowly. I don't want to talk about it, Thor said. She nodded. Good. Loki plopped himself onto a bench, poured some wine, and began his favorite activity, commentary no one asked for. So, he said, shall we reflect on what we've learned? Thor growled. 1. Giants are very gullible. 2. You, dear brother, make an alarmingly convincing bride. 3. If we ever need a diversion involving pastries and destruction, we now have a blueprint. Thor didn't respond. He was busy pulling bobby pins out of his hair with increasing violence. Loki tilted his head. You know, I'm just saying, if we really wanted to traumatize Thrym, we could have gone through with the ceremony. Imagine the look on his face, waking up next to you. Thor paused, hammer half raised. You think this is funny? I think it's hilarious, Loki replied cheerfully. Odin intervened, mostly to save the furniture. Let it rest, he said, placing a hand on Thor's shoulder. What's done is done. The hammer is back. Asgard is safe. And I, Thor muttered, will never look at a veil the same way again. Across the realm, the giants had not fared so well. Thrym's stronghold was now a pile of scorched stone and regrettable decisions. The survivors told tales of the Thunder Bride, a terrifying force in white who roared vengeance and swung a hammer like the end of the world. They now double-checked every bridal party that crossed their borders, just in case. Back in Asgard, the bards were already composing ballads. Titles ranged from Mjolnir's Return to the Wedding Crasher of Jotunheim. Thor tried to ban them all. The more he protested, the more popular they became. And Loki, ever the entrepreneur of chaos, began selling painted scrolls of Thor in full bridal regalia. For educational purposes, he claimed, the scrolls sold out. Eventually, Thor retreated to his hall, swearing off weddings, disguises, and Loki, in that order. For now, because in the 9 realms, peace is temporary, and humiliation, like fashion, tends to come back around. But for the time being, the Thunder God had his hammer, his pride, and his enemies thoroughly smited, a good day by Asgardian standards, which meant nothing was currently on fire. And that, in itself, was a victory. Freya was not a goddess, easily rattled. She had weathered courtship from giants, dwarves, and at least 2 minor constellations. She had navigated the politics of Asgard's council. maintained her glamour in battle, and once brokered peace between two rival swan flocks during a particularly testy spring equinox. But she was absolutely not prepared to discover that she had been the unwitting centerpiece of a giant wedding plot involving Thor in a dress, Loki in a veil, and her own name on the guest list, all without being invited. So when Thor and Loki finally returned to Asgard, they found her waiting in the golden courtyard. Arms folded, eyes narrowed, radiating a calm that could melt glaciers. "Explain," she said. Thor, to his credit, opened his mouth and promptly realized he didn't have a single reasonable sentence to offer. He turned to Loki, who looked suddenly very interested in a nearby pigeon. "Well," Loki said, "you know how sometimes hammers go missing, and then everything escalates." Freya stared at them both in silence. Thor tried again. "Thrym stole Mjolnir. He said he'd only return it if you married him. Obviously, we couldn't allow that. So, naturally," Freya said slowly, "you stole my identity, my dress, and staged a fake wedding, in which you," she pointed at Thor, "played the blushing bride, and you," now to Loki, "encouraged this." "Encouraged is such a loaded word," Loki said, backing away slightly. "I prefer enabled creatively." Freya exhaled sharply and rubbed her temples. "I'm going to need my dress back." Thor winced. "It's no longer in wearable condition. And the necklace." "There was gravy," Loki said helpfully. Freya turned and began walking toward Odin's hall. "This conversation," she called, over her shoulder, "is not over," Thor muttered. "That went better than expected." Loki nodded. "She didn't summon any cats. That's usually a bad sign." Elsewhere in Asgard, word of the wedding had spread, thanks in no small part to the ever-helpful Heimdall, who had taken it upon himself to ensure all 9 realms were kept immediately informed of major events, especially if they involved cross-dressing and property damage. Balder had heard the story and was laughing so hard he'd nearly dropped his lyre. Tyr was confused. Why didn't they just challenge Thrym to a duel? "Because that," Heimdall replied, "would have made sense." Even Odin had to concede that, theatrics aside, the plan had worked. Mjolnir was back. Thor was bruised, but triumphant. And Loki had only mildly embarrassed the pantheon. Still, there were formalities to observe. A council was called. All the principal gods gathered: Odin, Frigg, Freya, now in a completely new outfit with strategic accessories that suggested she was still annoyed, Tyr, Baldur, and the others. Thor gave a brief account of the adventure. Loki elaborated with sound effects. There were interruptions, sighs, and one incident involving a goose that had to be escorted out. When they were done, Odin leaned forward. "So," he said, "let me be clear, you dressed as Freya." Thor nodded. "And ate an entire ox at the wedding feast. It was a long day. And then you summoned Mjolnir from beneath the bridal veil and annihilated Thrym and his entire wedding party." Thor shrugged, more or less. Odin nodded slowly. "Excellent, carry on." Freya raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The hammer's back," Odin said. "The giant's dead. I call that efficient." Freya looked unconvinced, but said nothing. After the council, as the gods dispersed, some chuckling, some groaning, Loki leaned over to Thor. "See, no problem. No one's mad. You're a hero again." Thor gave him a flat look. "Next time someone takes my hammer, I'm just going to smash everything until I find it." "I'll bring a dress," Loki said. Thor didn't dignify that with a response. As they walked off toward the feasting hall, Thor was still hungry. Smashing giants burns calories. A quiet peace settled over Asgard once more. That temporary, brittle kind of peace that usually means Loki has a new idea. And sure enough, he did. But that was a problem for another day. Mjolnir, the reluctant celebrity. With Mjolnir safely back in Thor's grip, you might think the hammer could finally relax. Take a break from all the heavy lifting and enjoy a quiet life. But no, that's not how divine artifacts work. Mjolnir, the little hammer that could, suddenly found itself the star of every conversation in Asgard. And like any unwilling celebrity, it wasn't exactly thrilled about the attention. Imagine if your phone suddenly became the talk of the town. Every god and goddess wanting to hold it, admire it, or use it to smash something just because they could. That was Mjolnir's new reality. Thor, on the other hand, was mostly pleased. Finally, he muttered, something that commands respect, without me having to yell by Thor's beard every 5 minutes. But Mjolnir had its own agenda. It was, after all, a sentient hammer forged by dwarven artisans who didn't just gift it brute force, but also a healthy dose of sass. First came the subtle jabs. When Thor tried to rest the hammer on his shoulder, Mjolnir would occasionally vibrate annoyingly, as if to say, really, after everything. On more dramatic occasions, it would leave little scorch marks on his tunic, a passive-aggressive reminder of its importance. Then the social invitations started. "Oh Mjolnir, please grace the ceremony. Would you like to join the feast? Can you smash that annoying squirrel?" Thor quickly realized that the hammer had become the center of gravity in every room, often quite literally, since it could control the weather and the fate of storms with a flick. One evening, as the gods gathered for another feast, because Asgardians never seemed to tire of food, Loki sidled up to Thor with a grin that promised trouble. "You know," Loki said, "I think Mjolnir might enjoy a little vacation." Thor raised an eyebrow. A vacation for a hammer? Why not? Even divine weapons need a break. Thor considered this. So what? Hide it somewhere. No one will find it. Loki's eyes twinkled. Exactly. Think of it as a hammer sabbatical. That night, after the feasting and the typical boastful tales of battles past, Loki slipped away and hid Mjolnir in the most unlikely place, inside Heimdall's horn. The next morning, Thor was mildly surprised when he went to fetch his hammer and found it missing again. Heimdall, ever vigilant, looked amused. "I think your hammer wanted a bit of privacy," Thor groaned. "Loki, this isn't funny." Loki shrugged. "It is to me." Mjolnir, for its part, enjoyed the brief respite, but was soon back in action. Because even a hammer needs an audience, whether it likes it or not. Action. Some suggested appointing a hammer handler, someone to carry it around like a royal scepter. Balder volunteered, but was quickly disqualified after accidentally smashing a goblet of mead. Frigg was less amused. "It's a weapon, not a pet." Still, Odin mused. "It's good that Mjolnir is remembered. It means our stories live on." Thor, meanwhile, just wanted a moment's peace. But that was never the hammer's style. Because, in Asgard, peace was a rare luxury, and Mjolnir was always ready to remind everyone of that. The hammer's legacy, more than just after all, the theft, disguises, and horn hiding, you'd think Thor's hammer would just settle into smashing giants and protecting Asgard. Mjolnir's wild ride. Mjolnir wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol. A very loud, very heavy symbol of strength, protection, and stubbornness only a hammer forged by expert dwarves could carry. After its chaotic escapades, Mjolnir took on a new role beyond battle. Vikings started wearing tiny hammer pendants, because nothing says, "Don't mess with me," quite like Thor's personal tools swinging around your neck. Those pendants weren't just fashion statements, they were calls for protection. Those dwarves created summons. A little divine backup is more than welcome. It's essential. There's power in endurance, resilience, and a good sense of humor. And let's be honest, Thor was probably relieved not to have to explain another hammer mishap anytime soon. In quieter moments, Thor might have paused to admire the hammer's craftsmanship, something powerful, but also surprisingly beautiful. Proof that strength and artistry often go hand in hand. And somewhere, deep down, Mjolnir probably appreciated the attention. Heavy and high maintenance, sure, but legendary all the same. So next time you think of Norse myths, picture Thor, standing tall, hammer in hand, not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of resilience, stubbornness, and maybe a little bit of style, because even gods have to keep up appearances, especially when your hairdo is as epic as Thor's. Thanks for sticking with this thunderous tale. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing where you're listening from. Your thoughts keep these ancient stories alive, and Mjolnir definitely likes the fame.